What do we know about Dogman? What do we know about these creatures? Where they come from, why they're so scary, why they look the way they do, some of the odd stories, the feeling of dread. What makes these things so unique than, say, Bigfoot, or maybe a lake monster, or something else that's maybe sinister or unexplained? What makes these in the cryptozoological world, in my opinion, very much on the paranormal side of things? What makes them so scary, so interesting, so fleeting? I was asked to be in an interview, a couple of podcasts talking about this lately, and an upcoming kind of another feature documentary I'm going to be a part of. And they want to talk about the Dogman. I say, I'll talk about the Dogman. But there's a lot more here than I think most people realize when we talk about encounters, places that they happen, what people see. Some people see a lone Dogman. Some people see a pack of these things. Some people have folklore of about a pack of these things, which makes sense because dogs run in packs, but makes no sense at all, though, as dogs don't walk on their hind legs and aren't 7 or 8 feet tall if they are. So there's a lot we don't understand, and like I've said many times in the past, I think when we talk about Dogman, we're not talking about maybe a natural creature with some odd qualities or some kind of a creature that borderlines on the paranormal, like maybe Bigfoot or something along those lines, or like a lake monster. I think we're talking about something that's truly demonic, something truly maybe built for nefarious purposes. So, we know so little about their origin, and it's all speculation. What we can talk about, though, is what we've heard from eyewitness reports, encounters. And it seems to me that there are kind of two basic categories of these guys. Some of them seem to be more like a human body, with various type of dog heads, maybe something like a Bigfoot. If you guys are familiar with my work of the different types of Bigfoot, there's something called a gugwe, where it's basically like a Sasquatch, but with like a baboon or a dog-like snout, and they've got more human proportions and human legs. And some of these creatures look a little bit more like an upright dog with the long hocks and that kind of, where the legs set up like a dog would be, kind of like those reversed hinge kind of leg that dogs type have, but standing upright, which is very kind of unnatural for that leg style. And some describe them with the head of a hyena. Some describe them with more like a domestic dog or German shepherd. Some describe them with more like a timber wolf type skull. Some describe them with having a really huge head in proportion to their body. It's really quite fascinating. There seems to be a lot of variation in appearance of these things. And whether or not, the ones that have a more human-like leg are related to Bigfoot, which I think they are, they're still really scary and they're still very unnatural. And the feeling of dread, the feeling of impending doom, when you look at the teeth on these things, when you look at the muscle boundness and claws, it points to an engineering of pure destruction. Like, if you wanted to make the perfect guardian, if you wanted to make something built for combat in a natural way, these creatures seem to be it. So I know in the last 5 or 10 years, the subject of the Dogman has really kind of taken off in the cryptozoological world. I know it's always been around. If you look back to Beast of Bray Road, the Michigan Dogman, there's stories going all back to the 50s and 60s, but it doesn't even quite have the history that Bigfoot does. It's not quite as documented. But going way, way back, here's a depiction of St. Christopher, which is kind of an example of what they call cynocephalies. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Probably not. But it's basically dog-headed men, where they had human proportions. It looked just like a guy with arms and legs, but with a dog's head. And there's a bunch of descriptions of this all throughout antiquity and all around the world of these different chimeras. There's even reports of dog-headed soldiers that served with the Knight Templar. Here we are, we have a picture of Anubis, the god of the underworld, and he was pictured like cynocephalies, like with a man-like body, very normal proportioned, although extremely tall, with a very clear dog-like head. Now, the Egyptians are fascinating because they had a lot of really out there, a man with the head of an eagle, a man with the head of, a snake, that kind of stuff. Really strange creatures. And then in our modern pop culture, especially since, I think probably the 70s onward, with pop culture of werewolves, the big bad wolf, Little Red Riding Hood, wolves, were hunted to extinction, especially here, almost extinction in North America. There's always this kind of thing going on with wolves, big bad wolves, and they're often displayed as kind of like, the wolf man or lichens, werewolf type creatures, and usually referred to as layman's as a werewolf. If you'd never heard of the Dogman, you weren't into any of these things, and one of these guys trotted across the road or came out of the wood line and stared at you, you'd say it was a werewolf. And I think that's maybe an accurate description of what they look like, or what people can directly focus on and what they think they saw as far as a werewolf. But I don't think that these creatures are necessarily a man turning into a wolf like you see in the movies. And I think some of that folklore might be maybe somebody got abducted or eaten or killed by a dogman, and then the next day somebody saw the dogman. What you're also looking at here is some reported footprints of some of these creatures. Like this one is more or less like a 7-inch long dog footprint, an extremely long dog footprint. And that kind of makes sense if you look at some of the more, where it looks like an upright walking dog, kind of straightforward, timber wolf style, just very large dog. And there are reports of these things basically being on all fours and then standing up. Just like Bigfoot has some reports of them running on all fours and then standing up and running on 2 feet. And here are some other reported pictures. Now, I think some of these pictures might be, a creature with front and hind legs crossing over, but certainly terrifying if you find big clawed footprints and big strange prints in the snow. Things that, like this more elongated looking foot, like a dog foot, more of elongated looking foot, which if it was going to be 7 or 8, 9 feet tall and bipedal, it would probably have a more stretched out foot than a dog type foot. So I think some of these footprint photos may or may not make sense for them, but they're kind of interesting what some of the evidence people have collected on them. The other thing that strikes me about the Dogman is, a lot like Bigfoot too, is they're seen in desert regions, they're seen in wide open scrub kind of regions, foothills and rolling hills and areas, places with little water where you don't think something like that could survive. You also do hear about them in swamps and an old farmland. You hear about them in forested areas and woods, kind of similar areas where you would hear Bigfoot. The woods being with a lot of cover, having lots of moisture, having deer and things to hunt if they're a more natural creature, which, maybe they still need to eat and poop and drink and all that kind of stuff, but I think there's a lot more supernatural things going on with these creatures, whether or not they're in and out of our dimension or our reality, or they're the manifestation of something. I don't know. But one of the most common ones I've heard a bunch of times from people I've spoke to personally with tears in their eyes, really scared, I 100% believe them, is different various parts of the country, from California to Wyoming to Arkansas to Florida, who have seen these creatures, is them simply, like we see a lot of creatures, especially at night, is running across the road. I mean, for me, that's the vast majority of Sasquatch encounters, especially at night, coming back late, kind of a thing. And they need to cross roads too, because mankind has built roads everywhere. The other thing you also hear about these stories, and these are kind of a little more, horror story type things, is you get them in farmhouses, houses maybe on the edge of a community that are kind of butting up against woods or wood thicket areas. There's some really great stories out there. Take them all with a grain of salt, whether they're true, whether they're made up, whether they're a true embellished story. But, you get reports of them a lot like Bigfoot, looking in windows and stepping on porches, stealing chickens, killing dogs, livestock, that kind of thing. The other thing that's shocking is you also hear about them in cities. And I know where I live in Southern California, there's millions and millions of people, but we have these drainage ditches that comes back from the hills as the crow flies. We're really not that far anywhere in Southern California from mountains. And if you look at drainage ditches and riverbeds and bases, some of them very overgrown, if they are a natural creature that moves through normal locomotion. You know, it wouldn't be too far of a fetch for these guys to come down through the hills, maybe, you know, sleep in a drainage ditch or something like that, or hide out in a storm drain or something. You do get these reports in pretty major cities of these things just cruising around, which is really, really quite frightening. The thing that people seem to report and I hear about is some kind of a cover-up of their existence. Kind of like there's a really big cover-up with Bigfoot, which I think is more common and more prevalent than, say, these Dogman creatures, whatever they are. But there seems to be kind of, you know, to keep them on the outer edge, to discredit people. Oh, you saw a werewolf, you're a loony, you know. Kind of a lot of the same reasons of why there might be a cover-up for Bigfoot. There seems to be kind of a cover-up for this Dogman subject as well. And you do get reports of Bigfoot being around military bases and secret bases and DUMBs, deep underground bases, and like secret facilities. You get a lot of reports of these Dogman areas. Now, there's a couple of theories that maybe they're some ancient creature that's been genetically enhanced and modernized. Maybe they're a paranormal creature and there's some kind of, you know, a portal to another dimension. I know that sounds wild. Or maybe hollow earth or deep cave systems that some of these underground bases and military facilities have, that these creatures are sighted on. Maybe the government has them captured and tagged as, you know, guardians of, you know, say you're going to send spies and bushwhackers and snipers out in the woods to be forward observers of these military bases. What would be better protection than basically a cunning werewolf to go through there and clear this stuff out and scare the crap out of people? The best trained soldier in the world, you know, lying on the hillside, sees one of these things and he's probably going to leave in a big hurry. Much like Bigfoot, these also have an association with areas of high strangeness. Although there are some areas that have a lot of Bigfoot activity and orb activity that don't have Dogman activity, which is kind of odd. They either have both or one or the other. Here you see the famous Skinwalker Ranch, and they had instances of cynocephalies where it looked like dog-headed men smoking cigarettes, large wolf-like creatures that were like kind of huge like a dogman but on all fours running around. Very strange stuff that's been pretty well documented. The other thing that I kind of touched on when we were going over the types of them is this Gugwe creature that people say sometimes gets confused for a Dogman, which is a Bigfoot with like a baboon-like snout. And I don't fault anybody for calling it a Dogman, because if you look at a baboon down on all fours with its snout, with its large canines, you know, from a distance, it'd be hard to tell them from a dog. Now, I know genetically they're quite different. They're coming from primate species or coming from monkey species, which diverged quite a long time ago genetically from dog species. But it's kind of interesting how with the snout, the nose, the eyes, that they could evolve this way. And just like with Bigfoots, when we see some that look like a gorilla, some that look like a chimp, some that look human type, it also seems like with Dogman we get some that look like a hyena, some that look more like a big wolf, some that look more like some kind of a stretched out deformed human, some that look almost like cat-like. And, you know, Catman might be a real thing out there too. If you look through, especially like in Mesopotamia, the ancient civilizations all over Europe, and especially in the Middle East, and even in parts of Asia, there was every kind of crossbreed between eagles and lion men, eagle men, lion men, tiger men, dog men, you know, weird kind of chimeras, every kind of mix out there. And you're like, wow, these guys had a really good imagination. But in their stories, their carvings, their myths, they talk about them as real creatures, and they walked around. And for me, it's like, oh, that's just a bunch of myths and hooey. And then here we are, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years later, people see something very, very similar in the woods that, you know, might be very fleeting. They might glimpse it. It might run across the road. They might have them on their property, and they come around, very similar to stuff that we hear in Sasquatch. Or I've heard reports of them running in packs, which a lot of people see these guys as lone dogmen, which I get, and I think that's probably the vast majority of them. But I have heard a lot of encounters of these things running in packs with a big alpha and some smaller ones around and some younger ones, a bigger gray one or a couple bigger gray ones. And then people report them. I've heard reports of them in big ranches in Texas and in the South, of them coming through their property certain times of year. By the way, in Mexico and South America, there's some small villages that have a report of these dog-like creatures, the devil dogs or war dogs, as they're known. And it can even be a curse on somebody in different family lines where these things follow them around, which is quite fascinating. They're seen all along the border as well. But yeah, some people say that they see them in packs and they have them on their property. Oh, every summer for all through August they're on our property, then they move through. And other people have them habitually. There are areas that I'm convinced that have seen them once, and you'll never get another report in that area. You could probably stake it out every night and never see another one. And then there are other areas that are a lot like Bigfoot, where if you talk to the locals, you know where to go, you know what's up, and you could probably go anytime you want and see a Sasquatch. There's certain areas in Washington, Oregon especially that are like that. Parts in East Texas where you want to go have a Sasquatch encounter, hold on to your butt and go see it. And there's certain parts like that with these Dogman creature too. And when you look at the totality of the ancient history, the modern science, the paranormal aspects, these things being in areas that wouldn't make sense to support it, a lot like Bigfoot, a lot of the same kind of mirrored things that we talk about in Bigfoot, about where would they get the water, where would they get the food supply. But as far as a large upright walking ape, you can be not uncommon to have a 6'5", 300-pound human, and when you look at a 7 or 8 foot tall Sasquatch with incredibly broad shoulders, it kind of makes sense morphologically, but an upright walking dog doesn't. So now, to me, that just seems like it's something very different. It's something paranormal, something engineered, and may even be interdimensional. But they are not a natural creature. And I think there's a lot of people into Sasquatch, and there's a lot of people into Dogman, and there's a lot of armchair researchers in both. But there's a lot of field researchers in Bigfoot, and there are some, but there's not very many people that specifically go out in the woods with some milk bones and dog treats and a steak, and I'm going to park myself in a tree and see if I catch a Dogman today. In fact, when I go out Bigfooting, I'm hoping I don't run into any of these creatures. So in conclusion, I don't know what these creatures are. They're flesh and blood. They're very dangerous. They've been seen in unexpected areas. And a note to all your Bigfoot researchers and people going out in the woods in general, it's not always Bigfoot out there. Sometimes there are worse things. And for me, this is what you really have to keep an eye out for. So just stay safe in the woods. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.